Okay. Thank you all for coming today. We actually, so I'm really excited about the talk today, actually. I have been thinking about it all week. The topic is embodied Zen, and I've really sat with it as a koan. It has been a koan that has been with me most of the day, all day this week. And actually a little long, I mean, for a long time I've been thinking about this, but this specific phrase of embodied Zen. And I came upon it. I've been reading some books by Meido Roshi. He's a Roshi at a monastery in Wisconsin called Koshinji Monastery, and he is speaking very loudly. I say loudly. I should say he's being a strong proponent for this idea of embodied Zen, and he feels very strongly about it. And so it caught my attention about how strong he felt about it, I guess a month ago or so. So I've been thinking about it a lot. Yeah, so I want to talk about that today and get into that. So I could make this a really short talk by saying these three things right here. So to embody Zen, first of all, we need a teacher. Second, lots of zazen. And then third, I don't think this is 100% necessary, but the understanding how to approach our life from a koan type of um, practice, which doesn't necessarily mean formal koan practice, but even groups of even Zen groups who don't formally practice koan curriculum, they still do a koan type of training, more called the Genjo koans, the daily life koans. And so, for example, what is embodied Zen? That has been my koan this week, but it's not a koan that's in the formalized koan curriculum. But I think we all have questions that we walk around with, like, how do I become a more compassionate person? Or how do I have more empathy towards this one person in my life that's really challenging for me? Like, those are all koans, and we can sit with them and feel them and look at them from different angles, and then notice how we orient to that person in different days at different when we're in different moods. So anyway, approaching our life from that angle, from a koan angle, is and can be a really important part of embodying Zen. So anyway, having a teacher, sitting, lots of meditation, and then asking ourselves lots of questions about our lives and really looking deeply at how we're attending to our life. So I could stop the talk right there and then we could just walk away and think about those things. But I'll go a little deeper. I'll extrapolate a little more. So I want to share a story. I'll start out with a story. So I came into contact with the book Siddhartha when I was 17 years old in high school, senior year in high school, and I loved it. It was the only book in high school that I read cover to cover. It was the only one that had any kind of interest to me. Everything else I just did the cliff notes because I didn't find them very interesting. And the book Siddhartha is a fictional story that's similar to the life of the Buddha, but not quite. And yeah, it really caught my attention. And then I started reading some books on Kundalini yoga and other Eastern spirituality, other forms of Eastern spirituality. And then my freshman year in college, we read Siddhartha again, and my teacher had us read some books on Buddhism and yoga and Hinduism and Islam and Sufism and a lot of different Christian mysticism and things like that. And so I started getting in touch with this mystical aspect of spirituality versus the religious form of spirituality that I had grown up with. But anyway, I really felt aligned with what I was reading about Buddhism and Taoism, those two things together. And so I just kind of started considering myself a Buddhist. And if it came up, I'd say, yeah, I consider myself a Buddhist. I wouldn't say I am a Buddhist, but I'd say I consider myself a Buddhist. And And it wasn't until I was, I think, 27 years old 27 or 28 years old, until I started actually formally practicing Buddhism. So there was this period from about age 18 to about age 28 where I was reading Buddhism and I was practicing mindfulness and trying to meditate and doing yoga. But really, I wasn't part of, I had no affiliation with the teacher, had no connection with the Sangha or any kind of meditation group whatsoever, and just kind of doing it on my own. And what I remember is that there was this idealized image of myself that I was trying to be. I had this image of who Siddhartha had become by the end of the story. I had an idea of who the Buddha was, of who the Dalai Lama was, and these Taoist masters and Lao Tzu, and just from their writings and images that you see, pictures. And somewhere in my psyche, I had created some ideal version of myself that I was trying to be. And I was taking on these Buddhist ideas of non-attachment, sort of the more like um, fundamental ideas from ancient Buddhism from India, like yeah, like not attaching, not killing. So I was vegetarian and all these kinds of things. And to some degree, it was working. It was creating some sense of satisfaction for me, some sense of relaxation. Um, and it definitely made people around me think that I was really peaceful and a calm and kind person. But around 27, around 26, actually from age 26 to 28, I hit this really deep low in my life, a very dark night of the soul. And that's when I started really engaging in Buddhism and really trying to understand what Buddhism was. And everywhere I was looking, it said that you got to have a teacher, you got to have a Sangha to actually be practicing Buddhism, which I don't know if I don't know if I wholly agree with that. But, um, and then I realized during that short period of time how unembodied the Buddhism was that I had been practicing. That it was really this superficial ego structure that I had created, which I made up a word this morning called personified Zen, or what's the other word I came up with? Egoic Zen or ego. I can't remember the word I came up with though. It was around having an ego structure of Zen and using Zen ideas, using Buddhist ideas to create an idealized version of myself that I was trying to be through action. So, for example, we have the six paramitas, we have the four immeasurables, and those include things like patience, loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, sympathetic joy, uh, zeal, effort, things like that. And so often, until we have really developed a deeper practice of Zen and had some realizations, we're often, what I see in myself and others is we're trying to be it instead of it just being and coming through us. So we can try to be loving and kind. We can try to be compassionate. We can try to be equanimous. We can try to have sympathetic joy. Try to be joyful. And I think to some degree, if we're trying those things, there's some part of us that really deep inside wants to be those things because we know we have the potential to be those things. We know it's in our nature. And to some degree, I would say that there's maybe a slight bit of embodiment that happens there. But ultimately, It's really more of a game we're playing with ourselves. It's a show. It's a false self, you could say. Mado Moroshi says that Zen doesn't start until we've had our first significant Kensho, which is a realization or an enlightenment experience. So until we've really had a true glimpse of emptiness, we can't actually start practicing Zen until that point. Again, I don't know if I wholly agree with that. I think I was practicing Buddhism starting at age 18. Those philosophies were sort of easing their way into my subconscious or into my unconscious. They were having an effect on the person I wanted to be. They were helping me reorient to a world that's very consumeristic and materialistic. But the deep transformations for me haven't really happened until those realizations experiences started happening. Which, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so Zen not starting until we've had this realization experience. So in this question, in this idea of embodied Zen, there's this word embodiment, and then there's this word Zen. Both of them are the koans in and of themselves. So what does embodiment mean? And then what is Zen? Like what are we talking about when we're talking about Zen? And so in embodiment, one thing I realized, so the phrase that Mitomoro Roshi was using was embodied Zen. And what I realized is that embodiment is a continuum that has a start of zero and an end of infinity, or maybe the end of Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, or further. And so there's not this thing where you're not embodied and then you're embodied. It's not an either or. It's this continuum, and we're all on there somewhere. We're embodied in our spirituality to some degree. So that's why I was saying, even from age 18 to 28, those philosophies were in me somewhere, and I had grown up Christian and was a serious practitioner of Christianity at the time. And to some degree, there was some embodiment of compassion, some embodiment of empathy, some embodiment of caring for other, and it wasn't just some fake thing that I was putting on. So I do believe that there's this continuum that we're on. But I also believe that there's, from my own experience and from talking with others and reading and studying, is that there are these certain jumps that can happen in the process of embodiment when we do have these realization experiences, which don't have to happen within Zen. I had my first major realization experience when I was 18, my freshman year in college. And I wasn't meditating every day. It was actually happened in wilderness, and I had a very shocking awakening experience in nature, and a few more that same year. And they changed me. They changed the way I oriented to life. They changed what I wanted out of life. They made me see reality in a new way, see myself in a new way. So so they don't just have to happen within in Zen practice. And actually, I think most people typically have some type of awakening experience to even want to come to Zen. People have them through LSD experiences, through shocking traumatic events, like loss of a close person in their life or a pet. Those things can kind of wake us up sometimes. Some kind of brush with death can really wake us up and give us a glimpse into emptiness. But yeah, this idea of embodiment. So what we think, I think what probably most of us think of is that the teachings of whatever it is we're studying could be a sport, could be golf, could be social justice, could be whatever the thing is you're into. that the teachings, the philosophies, the ideals, the practice of it have absorbed into the person's psyche, into the cells of their body, or as we say in Zen, into the very marrow of their bones, to the point where they're living it. And of course, that would be that continuum. So, someone on the far end of the continuum is preaching love and kindness, but then they go home and they're abusive to their spouse. Someone on the far end, say the Buddha or Dogen or um, Thich Nhat Hanh maybe, or Dalai Lama, these types of people. Um, it's just so infused in their system that they're not trying to be anything. They're not trying to do anything. They're just being. And in just being, because of the amount of practice they've done, because of the depth of realization they've had, and the training that they've had, they just are in the world in a way that completely and fully embodies the teachings of Buddhism. And then there's the rest of us, I think, somewhere in between those two extremes. Or I can speak for myself. I'm somewhere in between those two extremes. Yeah, so I'd like to get away from this idea of embodied or not embodied, because in not embodied, it feels dualistic to me. And I do think that we're all on some type of intentional track, as conscious human beings. Even people that I've met who have antisocial personality disorder, I work as a therapist. Even people I've met who actually have a lot of difficulty feeling empathy for anyone other than themselves, and who really don't get along with the social structure, don't get along with other people very well. I'll hear the most compassionate things come out of their mouths. And often, if they have children, they really truly love their children. They have a difficulty feeling empathy and love for other people, anybody else. But even for their own children, they can actually have a feeling of caring for them. So even the people with the most shut down hearts, I still find in them there's some that natural Buddha nature comes through all those defense mechanisms and protections and ego structures. The actual definition for embodied that I looked at online that Google shared was to include or contain as a constituent part. So again, it's like the essence, the nature of us becomes this thing that is being embodied, whatever it is. So let's talk about what it is that's actually being embodied. Let's talk about Zen. Embodying Zen. So these are koans, right? I think there's some koans like, what is Zen? What is it that Bodhidharma brought from the West? So again, like I said before, there's all these teachings of Buddhism, and we could say teachings of Zen, like non-attachment and non-clinging, non-aversion, non-delusion, that all things are one, all these philosophical approaches to things. And I mean, there's, huge, thick books on the Buddha's teachings and the teachings after the Abhidharma and all these different teachings. But our approach in Zen is really different from that. It's really different from taking something intellectually and then trying to live according to this intellectual framework of information. Zen is not that. From my experience, from what we do at Great Mountain Zen Center, and from what I've experienced within the lineages of Zen in the US, Zen is experiential. It's really an experiential practice, not an intellectual one. And we hear that, people say that a lot. We hear people say that a lot. And so what does that mean? It means that in Zen, we have this deep, deep faith that deep down inside of us, there's already compassion, there's already loving kindness, there's already patience, there's already joy, there's already equanimity. And what's getting in the way are these ego structures that have developed karmically from our conditioning, from previous life, whatever energy came into us from before we were born, and the ways we've learned to develop protections for our uncomfortable feelings. So if I feel insecure as a person, then I might overcompensate. I might come off as proud, or I might avoid people and retract and isolate. There's all kinds of ways that we protect ourselves. But as these protections dissolve away, as we heal these deeper emotions, in Zen practice, there's this faith that underneath all of that is this deep wisdom, this prajna, the wisdom beyond wisdom that's always there, that is accessible. And so our practice in the beginning, and this is what Medo Moroshi was talking about when he says that Zen doesn't start until we have this deep realization, is that before we have a realization, before we have some kind of like touching into what emptiness actually is, into our true nature, we take Buddhism conceptually. We take it as an intellectual structure of things we're supposed to do and that we're supposed to try to be, ways that we're supposed to try to be in the world, ways that other people should be, all this kind of mental ego structure, really. And once we start having realization experiences into emptiness, then we start to realize, oh, there's something bigger. There's something else actually that's much more profound, much more interesting, much more enticing than all these rules and beliefs and philosophies that are outside of me and also the ones inside of me. Our practice of Zen over time is just becoming less and less interested in our opinions and beliefs about anything, about Buddha, even about Buddhism. It's just letting go of all those beliefs and experiencing this moment right now as it is, and then attending to it as we're drawn to do. Now, what happens is the more someone has trauma in their life, the younger they are. Age isn't necessarily a component, but it can be. People tend to wisen up over time. Even the most deluded of people can still develop some type of wisdom over time just from being a human being on this planet. But anyway, from whatever our childhood conditioning was, the negative parts of it, whatever energy came into our life, whatever our genetics were, that set us up to have whatever ego structure we developed. There's going to be core beliefs in there like I'm not okay, or I can't trust other people, the world is not ultimately good, or other Pollyanna. We could also have Pollyanna versions of like everybody's wonderful, the world is wonderful, everything's perfect. So we can have these dualistic views of reality, or embedded beliefs inside of ourselves that are there that we don't even know are running our lives. So as and then also just throughout life, I mean, most people are up in their brains. They're they're orienting to the world from a thinking angle, from a thinking position. And then as we practice more and more and more, we spend a lot less time paying attention to thoughts and a lot more time paying attention to the sensations of our body. And there are the five senses, like, hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, and feeling. But that feeling one is especially important. And it's not so much a physical feeling. We start to feel our intuition, which you could also say is prajna. We start to feel our emotional feelings. And there's so much wisdom contained in the emotional sensations that are happening in our body and also in that deeper intuition. And so over time, as our ego dissolves through practice, through realizations, that intuition gets more and more, becomes more and more and more aligned with what's happening around us. So when someone needs loving kindness for us, that's what we do. We're not trying to be loving and kind, we're just doing it because our intuition is aligned with reality and there's nothing getting in the way of keeping that from happening. Or sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes our body says boundary. We need a boundary with this type of person or this person or this situation in my life. And then that's what our intuition says. And as we dissolve more and more of that ego structure, maybe at a different moment, we wouldn't need a boundary with that particular situation or person. But at that time, it was the right thing for us. So we can get ourselves into a lot of trouble if we're trying to be loving and kind in a certain situation where we actually should have a boundary. And not that a boundary can't be loving and kind, because it can be very loving and kind. It's just a different kind. It's kind of like sometimes it can be more the tough love or the hard compassion versus the soft compassion. So I want to spend just a little bit of like about 5 or 10 minutes just talking about realization. So I just want to read a few quotes from Hakuin's Song of Zazen. We chant this once a week here at the Abbey. So Hakuin Zenji lived from 1686 to 17 something, or 1600 to 1700 something, and really revitalized the koan practice within Rinzai Zen, and was a very, very strong proponent of the importance of having enlightenment experiences. Because what he was seeing at the time was that the Soto school was just focusing on just sitting, practice realization, and there wasn't much attention being put on the importance of realization. And there was this idea that realization would just naturally happen over time. If you just kept showing up. And that ultimately it wasn't even that important. And we still see this debate happen today, and it's not necessarily a Rinzai Soto thing. We see it throughout spiritual disciplines, and we see it within Soto groups. One Soto group orients this way to practice, another Soto group orients this way. We're part of the White Plum lineage, and so we are a mix of the Rinzai and Soto schools. And Maizumi Roshi, as far as I know, went through the entire koan process twice. And had very deep realizations. And everyone who studied with him just talked about how clear he was, how clear his mind was. The embodiment at moments maybe wasn't always there because he had some sexual transgressions and some alcoholism. So there was something going on emotionally that he might not have attended to. But in terms of his actual insight with emptiness, Maizumi Roshi was known to be very, very clear. So, the quotes from Haguen Zenji. One true samadhi extinguishes evils, it purifies karma, dissolving obstructions. And a few lines later, he says, then the gate to the oneness of cause and effect is thrown open. And then later he says, our form now being no form, in going and returning, we never leave home. Our thought now being no thought, our dancing and songs are the voice of the Dharma. So the first two lines there are about realization, and the last one is about embodiment. So I want to talk about those. So many people have said this, but I met with Meito Roshi one-on-one recently in a meeting, and then I met with another Roshi yesterday from a different lineage, and I've talked with our Roshis here, and we all are in agreement that there are many Zen teachers out there who actually have not had realization, and many spiritual teachers out there. You can easily see this in other religions, who have not had deep insight into themselves, into emptiness. They take on the teachings really well. They practice mindfulness. They try to be present in their lives, and there is a presence about them. And they take on the precepts, and they live by the precepts, and they are what we would call good people, and have some insight into themselves. But they lack a very deep experience and clarity around what emptiness actually is. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. We're all drawn towards mentors who are just a little bit further than where we are. If somebody's too far away, we don't really get what they're talking about. And if they're at the same place that we're at, then we're not really drawn to learn anything from them because we already know what they know. So, in Christian, Buddhist, Muslim traditions, there's people teaching at all the different levels of spiritual understanding. And like I said, each of us is going to be drawn to a teaching, to a group, to a teacher who is somewhere within reach of what we can feel we might be able to attain, or they have something that they're teaching that we don't understand yet. And so we're drawn to train with them to learn what they have to teach us. But at some point, and this happens, we have a lot of people who come to Great Mountain Zen Center who have studied with other teachers and in other sanghas for many years, and then they come here and there's still something that they hadn't gotten from that community. And then they might get something from here, and then they go on to another community at some point and take it even further. I mean, I personally think our teachers have very deep insight here at Great Mountain Zen Center. But I wouldn't be so arrogant to think that it can't go deeper. Someone like the Buddha, with this idea of full and complete enlightenment. So I want to talk about that a little bit in what I've learned from my own experiences, and then from talking with some of these different folks, is that this idea of Kensho. Kensho can be synonymous with Satori, can be synonymous with awakening, realization, and even enlightenment. Enlightenment's a tricky word because I think most of us come into Buddhism, not all of us, but most of us come into Buddhism or spirituality, and we hear the word enlightenment and we really project onto it that it's like this really supreme, ultimate thing that like only someone like the Buddha could attain, and maybe not even the Dalai Lama is enlightened, or maybe not even the Thich Nhat Hanh was enlightened, or whatever. But again, I see it all as a continuum, and every human being is on it somewhere, is on this continuum of awakening somewhere. But then there's the actual experiences of them, and so Kensho, Satori, a realization experience, there's these moments that are really standout experiences that are like, whoa, what was that? And something in the brain shifts for even a slight second or for hours or even days for some people. And in those moments, something just does a shift in the brain, in the body system, and we see reality in a very, very different way than what we are normally used to seeing it. So some people might call these aha moments. You could have an aha moment. It's not necessarily a Kensho, but you can have these moments of realization where you realize. I had a client this past week who realized that he didn't care. He wasn't as empathic towards his spouse as he thought he was. For years, he thought he was being very empathic and understanding. And then suddenly, in 1 week, it just dawned on him that he wasn't being as empathic as he thought he was being. And everything has shifted for him. Like, it's a dramatic shift that just happened for him. Was that a Kensho? I'm not so sure. An aha moment for sure, a personal realization for sure, but I'm not so sure it was a Kensho. A Kensho is specifically an experience of emptiness. Seeing things as they are, seeing reality as it is without perceptional filters or certain perceptions of belief and thought. Now, they can be little ones. I've read about this, and then as I thought back, I was like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. There's actually little ones that we can have where we don't even know we had it. And so during retreats, there's often these little moments where like suddenly sort of like come into a daze for a moment and everything sort of pauses and then we come back. And I think of that as kind of like if you throw a ball up, there's that moment where it just kind of like is gravityless for a second and then it starts coming back down. I think about that with the mind too. It's like our mind is thinking and then it slows and there's a pause and then it starts going again. And I think lots of those actually happen during retreats. They've happened a lot for me, and I didn't really think of those as Kenshos, but some people actually call those mini Kenshos, mini awakenings. And they're enough to say, oh, that was, sometimes if we notice them, it's enough to say, oh, that was kind of cool. What was that? And then that can be enough to bring us back to the next retreat, to another retreat. Oh, I want a deeper version of that because we notice some kind of shift that changes that happens inside ourselves from those experiences. And then there's the other ones that are like more obvious, like I mentioned before, that are like, whoa, what was that? That was kind of intense. That was really cool. That felt amazing. Um, they're not necessarily always a Kensho. They can be a Kundalini energy experience where just a lot of energy bursts through our body and does something with our minds and our vision, and then we see things start kind of swirling around in front of us. Those aren't necessarily Kenshos. Kenshos are these ones where we're actually touching emptiness, from my experience and also from what I've heard other people talk about. So there can be shallow ones, there can be medium ones, there can be deep ones, and then there can be these very, very, very deep ones that are sort of like the full and complete enlightenment experiences. And so, like I said, there are many transmitted teachers out there, I believe, and I know some of them who I think have only had the very shallow ones. But it was enough to make a shift in them to take the precepts into their life, to take the teachings of Buddhism, and to live it out in some version of an embodied way. But I know that it's shallow because then the way they talk, it's still very dualistic sometimes. And they still get very rigid about seeing certain things in certain ways. And you can tell that there's that realization hasn't fully washed through yet, or hasn't washed through on a certain level yet. And then yeah, let me talk about this washing through, and then I'll wrap it up. Each of these realization experiences have some kind of washing through experience from what I have seen and felt. Uh, that sense of self, that vision of, or that experience of self, and the way we see the world through our lens of self, dissolves to some degree. And then the depth of that Kensho experience, how deep that Kensho experience is, actually continues that dissolving over time. It's almost like how a gas permeates through a space, or how a heat wave can come down off the mountains before a storm comes, and you just feel this heat move through the Front Range. That same thing happens with Kensho experiences. The deeper the Kensho experience, the more that wave penetrates. The deeper that wave penetrates, the more and the longer it keeps penetrating. And so there's this unfolding penetration of realization over time just from one experience. So our form now being no form, and going and returning, we never leave home. So now that we've found this home through this realization experience, we've found home right here. We never need to go anywhere else. And I don't mean physically, I mean mentally, emotionally, energetically. We never need to go anywhere else to feel connected, to find satisfaction. Our thought now being no thought, our dancing and songs are the voice of the Dharma. So the way we dance, the way we sing, the way we move in the world is coming from here. Not from here, not from a set of ideals, but from our basic self, our true, the self beyond self, this thing, without trying. So I want to finish here with, how does this relate to embodiment? Our teachers really try to encourage realization. They want us to wake up. They don't shame anybody for not having that intention or desire to have that, because not everybody has that, and that's okay. It's kind of like those teachers that only have the shallow experiences that then become, transmitted teachers. They're still helping people. They're still doing wonderful things. They're still wonderful people in many ways. And so each of us is going to have our own individualized karmic draw towards how deep we want to go. And I was just chatting with someone this morning, and it's like, yeah, I've had some very deep experiences, but I don't have that draw to go as deep as the Buddha did, probably, which, we don't know who the Buddha actually was, but what we can imagine. I know that from the experiences I've had, I know that it can go deeper. But right now, the experiences I've had are still unfolding in a way that's very interesting and very intriguing. And so it's almost like the experience happens, and then the embodiment practice happens after, which is what Mato Moore is talking about. We have the experience, then Zen happens. Then it starts incorporating into every aspect of our life, into our relationships, our careers, our jobs, the way we lay down to go to sleep, the way we brush our teeth. Every activity then becomes influenced by this realization of emptiness. If we're trying to do that without a teacher, we can end up going in odd directions with it. If we don't have ongoing training, it can plateau, and we can actually develop an ego out of it. And so in koans, in theory, technically, you have your initial breakthrough experience with the first set of koans, or even your first koan. Then there's 749 more koans after that to help you integrate that experience that you had, and then also to encourage more experiences, and then to incorporate those. So in theory, the teacher's moving you along based off of the depth of realization that you have, because you might not be ready for this set of koans until your experience has deepened enough to be ready for those set of koans. And this is why in the koan system, we do the precepts towards the end. We study the precepts after years and years of training in koans. Because they can become intellectual, conceptual, and become a set of rules that our ego is trying to live by, instead of a natural unfolding of who we are at our base level, and just seeing the koans as opportunities to look at our life. Yeah, as a conclusionary statement, I'll say that I think we're all of us Zen practitioners who are here today and who are listening, are on the continuum of awakening. We're on the continuum of enlightenment. We are on the continuum of embodying that natural enlightenment that is our true nature. That the more we sit zazen and develop samadhi, the more we are likely to have deep realization experiences, or deeper realization experiences. That those experiences, once they happen, then with a teacher and a lot of awareness and continued zazen, they start permeating into every aspect of our life. And that embodiment goes further and deeper into everywhere in our life. Which, if you look at the 10th ox herding pictures, the person goes back to the marketplace and takes all of that emptiness, all of that awareness that they've developed, all that dissolution of self back into the world. And now the practice really starts. So thank you all for your attention, and I hope your lives go well.